Hello and welcome to this Canmore Trust podcast. I'm John from the Canmore Trust, and it's my pleasure to invite you along for the next hour or so as you find out a little bit more about our journey and our mission. Inevitably, because this is the Canmore Trust, we'll talk about some difficult stuff. We'll talk about suicide prevention. We'll talk about suicide postvention and some wider aspects around mental ill health and the challenges that society currently faces. And so we want this to be a safe space, and we want to reference the fact that you can text Canmore, Canmore, to 85258 at any time. And also, if you go to our website, thecanmoretrust.co.uk, you will see a significant list of resources there, which you should feel free to explore and access at any time. So a safe space, a good space to be as we open up this conversation today. I'm delighted to have with me someone that has entered my life relatively recently, someone who's come to work with the Canmore Trust, Anne MacDougall. And Anne has recently been appointed as the Chief Operating Officer with the Canmore Trust. And Anne came to the Canmore Trust after a substantial competition. We had a number of applicants for the post, and Anne came out on top. So, Anne, it's a delight to see you this morning. And I have to say that some people have asked from previous podcasting about why we sit in this across the table formation. And it's a great question because actually this is an accountability podcast. This is not a pally-pally podcast. This is not us sitting on the same side of the table. This is a place where we're going to wrestle with difficult issues. And so if it feels strange at all that we're placed across the table, then forgive me for that. But we're going to cover some interesting and sometimes difficult questions. It's a delight to have you with us. It's a delight to have you in the Canmore Trust. A real pleasure to have you on board. So I wonder, Anne, if you might tell us first of all about yourself and about your background.
Yes. Well, thank you, John. Thank you for the introduction. So a little bit about my background. So possibly surprisingly to people, I actually have a legal services background. I worked in conveyancing before I came into the third sector. But I've now been working in the third sector for about 10 years. And the last 6 or 7 years of that, specifically in mental health, suicide, bereavement and distress. I was also extremely lucky to work in the last 18 months within the suicide prevention strategy, the Creating Hope, within the collective of the third sector.
So there's a word that we need to explore, collective. Tell us about how the collective works in Scotland.
So the collective is just what it sounds like. It's a collected group of people who have come together to try and solve this problem that we have within Scotland. So lots of third sectors, big organisations, small organisations, and the bigger organisations going out there to try and speak to everybody, to engage with communities, to engage with smaller groups, to engage with each other in a way they haven't done before.
Okay. And do you think that collective is working? Is it functional?
I think it is functional. I think they're aware that they still have a great deal to do. But the passion within the collective is real.
Yeah, it's something I find repeatedly in the suicide community is this issue of passion. It's that people find real purpose. Once they've experienced something of impact by suicide, it becomes a real drivenness to prevent suicide and to save families, communities, workplaces from experiencing anything of that in the future. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And I sometimes say after I've been in a meeting of those impacted by suicide, I wish I could bottle the energy because it is truly remarkable. And it's not just energy, it's the empathy that goes alongside that as well. So two questions, I guess, which go hand in hand then. One is, have you been impacted by suicide is I guess, the first question of this pair. And then secondly, How did you end up working for the Canmore Trust?
Well, the answer to the first question is yes. Unfortunately, we have been impacted as a family by suicide several times, mostly young people. And it's a different grief to any other grief you experience. It's a different journey. But it does drive me forward, because I remember in particular those young people, and I know why I'm doing this job. Why I ended up at the Canmore Trust? Well, you may ask.
Do you ask that question every day now?
I do. Every day I get up, I think, why am I doing this? No. So I heard you speak at the Creating Hope conference probably over a year ago, February 2024. And I was quite overwhelmed at the conference, as were a lot of other people in the room, at just your raw emotion and raw grief when you told us the story of Cameron and the journey that you and your family have been on since then. And it was overwhelming, John. There's no other way of describing it. It was really quite overwhelming. But a few months later, we were invited as a national, I worked for quite a large national organisation, and you invited several of us to come along to see your L2 training, which is your, I don't need to describe it to you, but for other people, it's the training that we take into workplaces and colleges, universities. So I was asked to come along, and there were some other colleagues from other organisations that came too. And from the first moment I walked into Canmore, I felt the heart of the organisation. And part of me felt, this is what's been missing from my journey through the third sector. And it was just such a family feel. It felt lovely to be there with those people, to be there with you and Isabel, to talk about what you had been through, and to try and find some solution, to try and find something to help and people who are impacted by suicide. And then, as you know, this job role came up. I applied for it, went through the process, and was absolutely delighted to be selected. And I think I've said this to you before, but the first moment I walked into the office in Stirling, I felt like I had come home.
And it's been a pleasure to have you with us. It's not been without its challenges, though. It feels as if a group of people have got behind to clip my wings and and make sure that things are done efficiently and well. And that challenge is good. I'm just going to take you back in the story that you've just told around the sense of overwhelm as people share their story. For me, there is real power in lived and living experience. There's real power in sharing the story of the impact of suicide. And I guess when you mention Cameron's name, when you invite him into the conversation, when you bring him into the room, it does something remarkable inside me, because it immediately refocuses on loss. It immediately refocuses on all that could have been. And one of the things that you do so well is that you give time and space for people to share their story. And I've noticed you do it time and time again. And I wonder if there's something that we need to share in this podcast at this moment, of allowing everyone who's listening in to have that skill of just affirming people on their grief journey and allowing people an opportunity just to share their story. Not to ask questions, just to have an opportunity to share their story. We often say in the training that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that we should listen much more than we speak. And you have exemplified for me part of what we train, which is that people, when they come raw to our training, often say, this is so important because I don't know what to say. And at the end of it, they go away not knowing what to say, because we don't want them to say anything necessarily. We want them to be equipped just to sit in the brokenness and the grief and to listen. And so I thank you for bringing that to Canmore. I thank you for bringing that skill, that lived skill, that lived experience, and you've caused us to refocus on that. And I think if nothing else goes out from this podcast, it's an invitation to those who have lost and those who listen to those who have lost, just to have that moment of silence and listening and affirmation of that grief journey, which is so important. And I guess for the future, there will be people sitting in the very chair that you occupy today, who will be invited to sit there because of their lived and living experience. And we'll get that chance to listen. So I really appreciate you sharing your story. You've worked in the third sector and specifically in mental health for several years. What personal story has impacted you most during that time?
There have been so many stories and so many different layers of people's stories. It's really hard for me to pick one. But I think the one that impacted me most and probably started me on this journey of working within suicide prevention and postvention was when I first started out. And I suppose it was my first intervention that I had ever had to do. And I did feel I had to do it. So this was not a prevention charity that I was working for. It had nothing to do with suicide. We didn't ask about suicide within our work. But I had to go to a family's house to do an assessment. And in the midst of that, I just had this overwhelming instinct that the person I was with intended to take their life. Now, I had no experience of it. I didn't know what to do. So when I came away from the house, I spoke to some colleagues and they said, did they actively say that that's what they were going to do? And I said, no, it's just an instinct. I just feel that that person is in danger. So I wasn't getting any help from anybody else. So I thought, well, this is on me now. The onus is on me. We were just going into the weekend. I was supposed to be finishing up work on the Friday. And I thought, I can't leave this person on their own. So I plagued this poor person over the weekend with text messages and emails and offers of help and suggestions to where we go next. And that continued the pattern over the next few weeks and months. And this family were broken. They were absolutely broken. They were rock bottom. But finally, it was a struggle, but we did manage to get them some help. Started to get them on the right path to some kind of normality in their life. And that was the end of that, as far as I was concerned. Until a few months later, this man walked into my office and said, do you remember me? And I said, yes, I will never forget you. He said, you know what I was going to do that weekend? I said, I do. And he said, you saved my life. But we can all do it.
Thank you for sharing. I guess one of the challenges that I've encountered since entering this suicide community has been two sides to that community. One side who have lost catastrophically, and one side where there has been an attempt, but an individual has survived. And it feels to me sometimes that although there's a shared issue of suicidality in the room, that there's a separation between those two camps. And it's something that I feel a great deal of pain about, because I would like those two sides of the community to be absolutely integrated and absolutely together, because I think we have much to share from each other, much to learn from each other. And every day, you know this, but every day we encounter people for whom the battle against suicide is very real. People holding on by their fingertips, and people who have made recurrent attempts on their lives, and their families look on into the midst of all of this and the trauma of all of that. And I think somewhere in the midst of all of this, we have to find community again of supporting each other and loving each other through that most difficult of journeys. And so I really appreciate your story, and I appreciate that there's a life saved in the midst of all of that. And I guess here's the difficult question for us all now, and it's a realization that the suicide numbers, the people who are dying by suicide in Scotland and in the wider UK, are just not going down. What's going on?
Well, John, if I had the answer to that, we wouldn't be sitting here. But I do think that people are overwhelmed.
So that's the third time you've used the word overwhelm since we started the podcast. And I think it's really important that we recognise that, because that's what I'm going to ask you to explore now, this sense of overwhelm for folks. Could you just take that forward?
I think people are experiencing such a bombardment of information, bad news, war, conflict, political unrest. Can we trust the leaders that that we ask to take us through these times? I think there's probably a lack of trust. Environmental disasters, worry about the future. And I don't think we can forget about what happened with COVID. I was working with a clinical psychologist during lockdown, and she told me, she said, in years to come, this will have an impact. We will get through this at the moment, but this will have an impact later on. And I think it has, in particular with our young people, because we were locked away for that period of time. And I think social skills and everything have disappeared. And it's easier now for people to sit in a room with their headphones on, listening to what's happening online, rather than interfacing with real humans. And I think that's part of the problem as well.
Okay. Do you think there's a way of dealing with the overwhelm? Is there anything that you and I can do, that the people who are watching or listening to this podcast can do to turn back the tide of being overwhelmed?
I think there is, and I think it's conversation. I think it's lifting your head and speaking to somebody who you don't know. You and I had a lovely moment this morning when the little Glasgow woman sung to us in the street.
Indeed. With her wellies on.
With her wellies on.
Yep.
Because we said hello and we spoke to her on the way past, it started that conversation. And I really think, even on the tiniest scale, talk to somebody, speak to somebody in the street, say hello. Seeing somebody smile or smiling yourself immediately lifts your spirits. I think we need to stop walking around with our head down in phones and all the rest of it and lift our head.
Amazing. We often talk in Canmore in our training about lifting your head. When our experienced friends go to work with individuals or families or communities, the question that we ask them to ask themselves is, have you caused this individual to lift their head? And I think it's a great question. Yeah. In the Canmore Trust, we often use the phrase, today's postvention is tomorrow's prevention. Is that a helpful concept?
I think it is a helpful concept because we know that people impacted by suicide bereavement are more likely to go on and either take their own life or harm themselves, or certainly suffer from some kind of mental health issue. So yes, I think it is.
And I'm just wondering, I think everyone who's listening or watching will understand what prevention is, stopping in advance of the event. But I wonder if we need to unpack postvention, particularly in the context of suicide. Could you explain to us what you understand by the term suicide postvention?
So postvention work is work we do after a suicide has occurred. It might be with an immediate member of family, but it could also be a community. It could be a school or a university or a workplace. So after, simply postvention after that thing has occurred.
That's really helpful. It feels to me as if suicide postvention is a relatively new concept. Is that a fair comment?
I think, yes, it is a relatively new concept because actually suicide prevention is not that old a concept either.
Interesting, yeah.
I think we've spoken about suicide prevention for many, many years, but I think we have got to the point now where we are actively doing suicide prevention. And the postvention work now is being recognised as so important because that person who has been impacted by suicide is far more likely to go on to take their own life.
So a phrase that we need to get out there is that good quality postvention today is tomorrow's prevention. That's an essential part of this.
Yes, absolutely.
You mentioned just a few moments ago the concept of community and the importance of community. So I use the term a lot, the suicide community. I've fallen into this new community. I've met many thousands of people in the suicide community now. If you give me the choice, do I want to be here or not? Clearly, I would have Cameron back. Clearly, I would backpedal and go to a point where my boy was still alive. I can't do that. So I'm catapulted into this place that I call the suicide community. And I wonder if some people struggle with that as a concept. Do you think that's a helpful concept? Do you see yourself as part of the suicide community?
I think it is a helpful concept because when we say suicide community, we're not just talking about people who are impacted by suicide directly. We're talking about the people who are impacted indirectly. But we're also talking about the people who work within these communities and have done it for a long, long time. And I think that recognition of the fact that we now do have a suicide community is really helpful because you can be part of the club. You might not want to be part of the club, and most of us don't. But the support that people who have been impacted can give to others who are impacted is invaluable.
So I guess that's a really important point for anyone who's listening or watching. If you're not already reaching out into that community for help and support, if you yourself have been impacted by suicide or you've made an attempt on your life, please reach out. Yeah, please make contact. Contact the Canmore Trust, contact one of the other suicide prevention or postvention charities, and let's welcome you into that. And here I have to say something about SOB, Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide. Jackie Walton's group in Edinburgh. I found myself there just weeks after Cameron died. And it was truly remarkable. I walked into a room, there were 40 people in the room, all of whom had lost to suicide. Most of them had lost sons to suicide. And I'll never forget the embrace individually and communally of that room that night. No judgment. Just this place of total acceptance of who I was. and what had happened. And so that community is so important. Yeah, so important. Let me lighten the conversation just for a little bit. In your opener, you told us a little bit about you and your journey, but you didn't really tell us about yourself, did you? Because you didn't tell us why there's a bit of an Irish accent in there. You didn't tell us about childhood in the north of Scotland. You didn't tell us about family. You didn't tell us about all of that. So here's your opportunity. Tell us a little bit about the Anne MacDougall show.
Thanks, John. Yes, there is a North of Ireland accent there. So I was born in the North of Ireland. My parents were both from the North of Ireland.
Whereabouts?
County Tyrone.
County Tyrone. Beautiful.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Do you miss it?
I never lived there. Yeah. So my father was in the RAF, so we travelled all over the place. And I think that's why there is a slight Northern Ireland accent still there, because the mainstay of that dialect was in the house. So when we were in London, we weren't allowed to speak with a London accent. When we were in Yorkshire, we weren't allowed to speak with a Yorkshire accent. And eventually, after 24 years in the RAF, my dad came out and we moved to Caithness.
Ah, way north.
Yes,
Yes.
way north.
Okay.
So
did you grow up in Caithness?
Yes.
Okay. So what age were you when you got there?
6.
Ah, okay.
Mm.
And then you were there until you left to go to university?
Yes.
Okay. So that is a long time.
It is a long time.
But you've still got that accent.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I know.
Yeah, yeah. Was Caithness good to you?
Yes, Caithness was a great place to grow up. Lots of freedom. You went out in the morning and you were safe to go out and play on the beach and see your friends and come home at tea time. It was a really good community.
What do you remember specifically about it? What if I say to you, childhood in Caithness, what's your immediate memory?
The beach.
Ah.
And it's still my happy place, is to be down by the sea and to walk along the beach. And you don't realise it as a child that actually that's impacting your mental health. That's setting something up for your future. That you know that if you walk along the seashore, you're going to feel better.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's also about, running with the dog and my sister and my cousins when they came over from Ireland. And that was because of the troubles at the time. It was very difficult for them. So coming to us in the north of Scotland was such a great escape for them.
Wonderful. I'm about to cross a boundary, but I'm famous for crossing boundaries. And you're a private person, and I'm not asking you to take us any further into this, but you have a husband and 2 grown-up children. Yeah. All of whom bring you great delight. I know that you're a very family-focused person. And I guess one of the things I see in you is you reach out as a mother in many circumstances. You become a mum to many people, and it's just one of the most beautiful things I see in you. Can I just acknowledge that you just reach out and offer that part of yourself to so many people? And I just wanted to acknowledge that and say thank you for that, because it's a really special part of who you are. But let's not all sit and cry, will we? Will we move on? Because there's some tough questions still to cover. So, one of the questions that I ask everyone who sits in this chair is to think about a blank sheet of paper, to think about an unlimited budget. What would you do in that context which would bring suicide numbers down acutely and urgently?
Well, it would have to be a really big sheet of paper.
And a very big budget, I guess.
And a very big budget.
Yeah.
And I think working in the third sector for the past 10 years, I am so aware of the restriction on budget.
Yeah.
But I think if we had unlimited budget, unlimited resources, I think one of the first things I would want to do is raise people above the poverty line.
Yeah.
And I don't mean, we're not talking about Victorians when children are running around in rags. This is a poverty that goes beyond that. It's unseen.
Yeah.
But it limits people's access, in particular to services. And I know, coming from the Highlands, how difficult it is to access services. But I also know about the pride of the people. People will say, oh, but the NHS will pay for you to go to your hospital appointment. Yes, but you have to ask. You have to ask for help. So I think one of that, that is blue sky thinking. Let's get everybody above the poverty line. Stop people struggling. Stop the stigma around poverty and being afraid to ask for help. But also access to services. I've sat with very broken people who were being told they could wait 2 or 3 or 4 years for an appointment to mental health services. That's a very broken system.
Yeah.
So if I had an unlimited budget, unlimited resources, I would have something on every high street. Not a clinical setting, a holistic setting, where you could walk in on every given day and say, I need somebody to talk to. Please help me. And we're doing our best to create safe spaces for people. But I think we can do more.
I was delighted to see that Sam H, our sister charity, Scottish Action for Mental Health, had announced recently exactly that their vision to have these safe spaces where people can drop in just for help without an appointment. And I bless them for that. If that happens and rolls out across Scotland, then I agree with you. I think we'll be in a much better place.
And we have had these things before. But as soon as the funding cuts come, it's the first thing that goes.
Indeed. If I could crack you open like a piece of Blackpool rock, 3 letters would emerge at every place that I cracked you open, and the letters would be DBI.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit, for those who are listening and watching, what DBI stands for, what it means to you, and how we can learn to take DBI forward?
Yeah, so you're quite right. It is embedded within me. And I feel very privileged to have worked within that service. So the distress brief intervention, which is what DBI stands for, and you're quite right, you're always telling me to stop using acronyms.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Keep it simple. The distress brief intervention is exactly what it sounds like. It's a brief intervention that came out of the first suicide prevention strategy. And I was lucky enough to run one of the first pilot projects of the DBI in Inverness. And the whole point behind the DBI was to stop the revolving door into services and in particular to our frontline staff. So imagine on a Friday night, you're feeling particularly upset. You bump into your local policeman and he says, come on, John, I'll take you up to A&E. He takes you up to A&E. You sit there for 4 hours. They come and assess you and they say, but you don't have a mental health diagnosis. And then you go back home. And the following weekend, you repeat the process. So your frontline worker, your police officer, your ambulance crew, your GP are starting to feel demoralised. They're starting to complain of compassion fatigue because they can't keep doing this. And that's where the distress brief intervention came from. So the distress brief intervention takes referrals from the police, the ambulance service, GPs, mental health teams, and now NHS 24. They're also working in schools now. And it's to provide that brief intervention. It's only 14 days, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but I have seen how it works. And one of the key points to DBI is the response is within 24 hours. So if a police officer says to you on the Friday night, somebody from DBI will call you tomorrow, they will call you tomorrow. Saturday, Sunday, doesn't matter when. And the first most important conversation is usually that first call that the DBI makes to people.
And is DBI as a service available across the whole of Scotland?
It's across the nation now.
And how would someone in crisis access that? Is it through one of the frontline emergency services?
They can be offered it through a frontline emergency service, or they can get it through NHS 24, or they can just go to their GP.
And if people wanted to know more about it, if they search online for DBI?
DBI, and there's a website, all the contact details, you can get directly through to one of your local DBI services.
Fantastic. It sounds like something we should be talking more about.
Yes, I think we should, because it's about compassion. It's a connected, compassionate service.
You know that we lost Cameron in 2019. It's 5 years since he died. Do you think you can give me any assurance that Scotland is a suicide-safer country in 2025 than it was in 2019?
I don't know if the assurance is the right word, but I think we have learned a great deal from the last suicide prevention strategy to the latest. And I think services like the distress brief intervention, what came out of that suicide prevention strategy, when we first started that service, we didn't ask about suicide, which now seems astonishing. But within the first year, we were working with Rory O'Connor and Jack Melson at Glasgow University. They said we should be asking the question. Ask everybody if they've felt suicidal. Because we've proved that that doesn't make somebody suicidal. But then on the back of things like DBI, there came suicide bereavement support pilots, which were the first pilots. So then into our post-vention work. So we're learning all the time. But I think the most important thing has been us working together, collaborative working and talking to each other.
So I guess that takes me to this next difficult question, which is, are we working sufficiently collaboratively in this sector? Government organisations, statutory bodies and the charity sector. Have we got a ways to go yet?
I think we have a ways to go yet, because I think like everything, we become complacent. We have all the big national charities together and quite a lot of, smaller grassroots charities together. And I have the shoes to prove it. We spent probably, myself and my colleagues, a good 3 months out in the community talking to people, walking and talking and really asking communities and different, more high-risk groups what they needed from us as a collective. But I think, and you and I both have this experience on a regular basis, sometimes it's not the conference hall or sitting around a conference table. It's an odd conversation with somebody in a cafe or on the bus or on the street. Really? That's what you do? I'd like to know more about that, because we can't possibly know, we can't connect everybody in unless we know they're there.
Sure thing.
So it's again about having different conversations and being open to those conversations.
Lovely. Great. I lighten the load just for a second again. You're a reader, I know that. What are you currently reading? Number one. And who's your favourite author?
So I'm currently reading a book by a Japanese author.
Oh,
So I'm going to get this name wrong, so I did write it down. So his name is Kawaguchi, and it's called Tales from the Cafe. And it's quite a gentle book, and it's little short stories. But the concept behind it is that you can travel back in time from the cafe to a moment in time. You can't change the past and you can't change the present.
So I can't get Cameron back.
But you could have a conversation.
Ah.
Yes. It's really beautiful. It's beautifully written.
Wow.
And I'm really enjoying it.
So is that a first time reading this author? Or is
yes.
That,
Yes.
So who's your favourite author overall and who floats your boat?
So I can't pick one because I have two that are very close to my heart. So I'm a big murder mystery fan.
Okay.
And of course, the queen of murder mystery is Agatha Christie.
Okay.
And I've read Agatha Christie, I think, since I was in my teens, where I was to be found in the library always with umpteen Agatha Christie's.
Lovely.
She's still my comfort, my go-to.
So you can get comfort out of murder mystery. How interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Because that would jar me, I think.
Have you read Murder on the Orient Express?
I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the struggle that Poirot goes through between good and evil, I think she was absolutely astonishing at pulling out human nature.
Wow.
So that intrigues me.
Okay. So Agatha Christie's one.
And the other one is, and people will be groaning, Jane Austen.
Oh, I don't think you'll hear much groaning.
I love Jane Austen, and I love her take on women in particular.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking about the 1700s.
Yeah.
But she had such a take on women that it's absolutely astonishing. But people will talk about Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, but actually my favourite book from Jane Austen is Emma. And it's about kindness. And Emma finds the hard way that she should be kind in life.
Wow.
So that really resonates with me. But one of the best quotes, I think, and I think we could use it now, we could put it on our office wall in Canmore.
Yeah.
From Sense of Sensibility, she says, it isn't what we say or think that resonates. It's what we do.
Wow. Well, let's cut to the chase then and ask this question. If someone is listening to this podcast today and is thinking about taking their life, what would Anne MacDougall, with all her life experience, say to that individual?
Stop. Stop. Take a breath and reach out for help. Speak to somebody, anybody. If it's that person that smiles at you in the morning when you're walking to work, or your neighbour or a friend, reach out and ask for help. Text Canmore, but ask somebody for help, because you will never understand the impact of what you're thinking of doing on those around you.
You catch me for a moment as well. Yeah. So stop. Seek help. Great advice. Does Anne MacDougall have any unfulfilled aspirations for her life?
I have lots of unfulfilled aspirations.
Let's go for them.
I would like to travel more. So lots of travelling in my future, I hope. And I would like to walk the Great Wall of China. Always been a an aspiration. I could do it for charity.
Wow, let's do it. Yep.
You see before you an unfulfilled Shakespearean actress. I would have loved, as a young person, to go to drama school.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to do. The obstacle was that I had crippling shyness as a teenager and couldn't possibly have done the...
Oh, you've clearly battled through that.
I haven't. I'm still very shy. I know there will be people listening to this thinking, I've seen her stand up in front of 200 or 300 people. But yes, to talk about something that I'm so passionate about.
I understand.
That's different. Yeah. If you're doing it for somebody else, it's different.
Yeah.
But yes, that's what I would have liked to have done.
I love those aspirations. That's great. Even although you came to us as a fully fledged Chief Operating Officer, we've put you through training as an experienced friend. You've done your level 1 and level 2 training. Just last week, you completed your level 2 training. First of all, how useful was it? And secondly, what do you think you've taken away from it?
So it was very useful. The training was really impactful. So the first couple of days is about mental health first aid, which I've done before, but it doesn't do any harm to refresh that training. And actually it was different from the way it was delivered before. So it felt a much more relaxed and safe space to do the training in. And it's always good to have those refreshers of your skills, because your confidence wanes in time. Sometimes you're bombarded with other people's emotions, and it can wear you down. So it was really good to do that refresh and to just feel confident again, feel uplifted. And the second part of the training was just exceptional. Talking about scenarios and safe spaces and just how to do the job. And I think my takeaways from it are, I was absolutely amazed at the group of people that I worked with during the course. Mostly young people, so again, I was the mum of the group. But that's fine, that's my happy place. But amazed at their willingness to give. To give back.
Yeah.
So it was extraordinary.
Fantastic.
I had a fantastic couple of weeks.
And I guess if there's anyone listening who's had an experience of suicide, had been impacted by suicide and would think about training as an experienced friend, then please be in contact with us. We've covered a lot of ground today, and each day you cover a lot of ground in terms of the work that you do. How do you stay safe in all of this work? How do you stay safe?
Mostly by talking. I like to talk. But at work, I think it's really important to have those close connections with your colleagues so that you can talk through the things that you're hearing. And we're very lucky because we do have a clinical psychologist that we work with to explore those deeper feelings. But I have a very supportive family. My husband, whether he wants to or not, hears everything. My children and I are very close, and as you said, they're now adults, and I actually think it's helpful for both of them as well, for me to talk about what we hear on a day-to-day basis, because it also raises their awareness. But self-care. And self-care for me looks like sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's a walk. I love to get to the beach if I can. But sometimes it's just coffee and cake with friends and that decompression from the day's toil.
Love that. Thanks so much. We've covered a lot of ground today. You and I will have coffee and cake just to check in. But I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you at a number of levels. I want to say thank you for coming and being part of the family that is the Canmore Trust. Thank you for the wisdom and the life experience and the professional experience that you bring. But much more than that, thank you for your willingness just to give back into this remarkable community, because you have such a heart to save lives, to suicide, and to hold those close who've experienced or being impacted by suicide. And so thank you. And thank you for being here for a Canmore Trust podcast.
Thank you.
It's really important that as you listen to this podcast, that you are in a safe space and that you take opportunity for your own self-care. Please text Canmore to 85258. That's CANMORE to 85258, 24/7, 365 days a year. Or go to our website, thecanmoretrust.co.uk, where you will find a plethora of resources which you may wish to look at and take action with. Once again, stay safe, stay well, and thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.